So this is kind of an impromptu video I'm doing real quick. It's just going to be raw footage and me talking. And it all spawned from a fellow legend enthusiast who just today asked me a very specific question about my project. And he had a very specific goal in mind, and that's the kind of questions I like to answer. So I wanted to go ahead and take this opportunity tonight because I've got two personal projects here. This car is not mine. The legend is, of course. But these two projects, two completely different goals. The goal on this car is race car. And as you know, the goal on mine is restoration and future proofing the car. I want it to last another 30 years. This car, not so much. He wants to use this car for autocross and drifting. And so really having it perfectly show quality and absolute cosmetic perfection are not the priority. Whereas on the restoration project, it is the priority. We want everything just as nice and pretty as it can be. And we ain't gonna be tracking that car. So before I get into everything and answering this fella's question, I just want to thank everybody for all the interest that they put into my project and yada yada yada. It's really a morale booster when everybody gives me all the likes and the comments, and I really appreciate it. So before we get into his exact question, you can see this car is going to have a lot of body filler on it. This would not be what I would consider restoration quality body work. This quarter panel over here had to be replaced because there was just absolutely no saving it. But you can see, I mean, there were dents all over. And just so we're clear, this is technically a totaled car. And not because it was structurally unsafe or anything like that, but because it was simply going to cost too much to repair in a regular body shop versus the value of the vehicle. So just a technical total because of the value. So he got a good deal on it. It already had all kinds of performance modifications already done. And as you can see, he's doing a full color change on the car. He went ahead and purchased all the bolt-on panels it was going to need. Needed both fenders, a new bumper. We saved the hood. And this is a brand new door. So the only bolt-on panels that were able to be saved was the trunk lid and the passenger side door and the hood. Every other bolt-on panel was replaced, and the only structural or weld-on panel that we replaced was that quarter panel. And at the end of the day, he's going to have a sweet-ass car that he could roll up to any meet and turn heads. But underneath all that pretty paint, it's not, like I said, going to be restoration type quality like we're doing on the Legend. So that is the first point I want to make in this video, is what your end goal is. And that's really going to be the main determining factor of what your budget needs to be. And I'm going to give you a lot of information later on in the video as far as selecting your paint and how far you want to tear things down, how much cost you ultimately are going to end up with if you're trying to take it all the way like I did with mine. So to answer the question from the enthusiast today, he asked me how far I tore down the interior. It sounded like he was in the planning phases of doing either a full restoration paint job on the car or possibly a color change, because he mentioned pulling the motor and painting the engine bay and stuff like that. But his specific question was, how far did I go with the interior, and would it be worth it, I guess, to go ahead and pull everything out so that less masking would have to be done when it came time to spray. And to answer the question, basically, easy answer, everything you have to take out the sunroof. So the reason I wanted to take out the sunroof is because I'm going pretty far on this car restoring everything. I wanted to clean out the trough that goes all the way around that sunroof. Your sunroof glass does not seal out all the water. You get water that runs past that. It ends up in a trough, and you literally have tubes that drain that water out towards the wheel wells. So I wanted to make sure all that was cleaned out nice. I wanted to treat all the rubber components and plastic components in the sunroof assembly itself, make sure all the trough was cleaned out well, re-lubricate the sunroof tracks and all that kind of stuff. And also, when it came time to paint, I wanted to paint all the way down to the edge of the panel where that sunroof opening is, all the way around. So I wanted the sunroof completely out of the way. Is it necessary to get paint on that roof? Not really. You can partially open the sunroof and kind of tape it off, but you won't be able to really get a good coat of paint all the way to the edge of the panel around that opening. Since I was going to be running my sealer all the way edge to edge on every single panel, best thing to do was to go ahead and tear it down. And to get that out, obviously the headliner has to be out of the way. But to get that far, basically on the coupe, you're going to have to start with the back seat. You're going to have to get seat bottom, seat back out of the car, remove the side trim pieces in the back, took the rear package tray trim off back here. We even took the glass out of the car, and I'll get into why I went that far later on. But all of that has to come out to be able to properly get out the sunroof. Your trim on the pillars, up front, B-pillars, rear pillars, all that, just to get the headliner out of the way. So there's quite a bit of disassembly already just to get to that sunroof. And that's pretty much where I stopped. It was not necessary to pull the seats out for doing what I was doing. Obviously the door trim panels and everything came off of the doors. Doors were unbolted from the car, painted on stands. The only thing that went in the paint booth when it came time to shoot the body was the body. Every bolt-on panel was removed. So it was not necessary to take the dash out, center console and all that stuff. You see I did protect the dash. I got the 3M Spark paper. It's been on there for 9 months now, keeping everything covered up and protected, because this dash is crack free as of now, and so I'm trying to keep it in good shape. And taking it out, going to all the trouble to take it out and then having it take up more space in the shop on a part stand somewhere is just, we got a lot of business going on here, and just the less I can have parts sitting around from this project, the better. So would it be beneficial for you to strip it all the way down to the carpet, remove the carpet and that sort of stuff? Absolutely. You're going to be doing a whole lot of sanding, a whole lot of dust is going to be getting all over everything. So, I mean, really it's a personal preference on how much post cleanup you want to do. I did not take out my carpet. I did not take out my seats. Like I said, I have got, you know, a carpet cleaner and everything I need to really clean this thing back up. I'm going to be getting the seats redone anyway. That's another question I get a lot when doing restoration projects. Should I get the interior done first and then get the paintwork done at the body shop? It's like, I mean, there's two sides of that coin. If you have the interior done first, there's the risk of your body shop guys messing up the leather, getting paint overspray on something. And then if you do the interior last, you know, is somebody gonna scratch up the paint, removing the seat from the car, somebody slip, you know, stuff like that. So either there's pros and cons to going either way. I do the interior last simply because I'm gonna remove the interior myself, and I'm gonna be super careful with everything. So another part of his question was, if he fully stripped everything down, you know, he would have less masking to do. He wouldn't have to fully seal up the door openings, the window openings and stuff like that. He could just spray and let that overspray go everywhere. And one of the things that I would not be comfortable with is pretty much the wiring and stuff like that. You really don't want overspray or solvent getting on the wiring harness and all the insulators and stuff like that. The solvent will have a tendency to make the rubber around the wires turn brittle, and you really don't want all that overspray all over that. You would have to do quite a bit of stripping down to paint a car that way. The only way I would see that making sense is if you were going so far, so extreme, to have the body chemically dipped, where they put it in an acid pool and that breaks loose any rust or corrosion that might be inside the frame rails and every little place that you can't get to paint. But really, that's totally overkill on old Japanese cars. They did a pretty good job with their corrosion protection and stuff like that inside the frame rails, and there's really no point to going to that kind of extreme unless you're talking about an American muscle car from the 60s or 70s or something, where the corrosion protection was not so good when those cars came out of the factory. And it's just, that's totally overkill in my opinion. Plus, masking off the door openings and the window openings with the car fully disassembled is not that big of a deal. You buy you a $40 or $50 roll of the painter's plastic that I'll show you here in a second. Basically, what I did to mask off my openings is you back tape this sticky side out. That tape is on the inside of the pinch weld all the way around the door opening. Do that to the window openings. If the glass is out, did it around the glass openings for the front and the rear. And you basically take that plastic and you drape a whole sheet of it over the whole car, and you come back with a razor blade and you just trim out along that tape, and everywhere you're going to be painting, you peel the rest of the plastic off, and you're left with a perfectly cut plastic piece that fits that door opening. Be a good idea to kind of put another piece of tape to hold it there. Also, make sure everything's cleaned real nice so your tape sticks and doesn't come loose while you're spraying. Remember, when you're spraying, you got a whole lot of air volume blowing up against the plastic. You don't want anything coming loose, but it's really easy just to go ahead and mask off the door openings. So when it comes to taking apart your interior, yeah, you want to remove your little step trim that's across here. You have to take that off anyway to get your plastic rocker moldings off. And the carpet can easily be pulled back. Get that tape to the back side of that pinch weld there. So really, on the coupe, there's no reason to take it any further than what you see it right now. And if you don't mind masking around the sunroof, you can even leave the headliner in. The masking process is really not all that complicated or difficult to do. The only tip I have for you on the materials that you use good painter's tape. You don't want to just use some regular tape you found at Home Depot. And don't get your hardware store painter's plastic that you would use as a drop cloth for painting inside your house. Use something that's meant for the purpose. It's not very expensive, and you'll even see right here it says paint this side up. It's because one side of this plastic is treated with a chemical that makes paint stick to it, and that's very important because you start putting your first coat of sealer on there, and by the time you get to the point of putting your base coat and your clear coat on, you have paint that started to dry to the plastic. And again, you're spraying air everywhere, and the plastic is moving and flexing, and you'll end up with little chunks and flakes of that dried paint that start to float away and get on your sticky wet painted surface, and you've got a mess. So something as simple as just going with the correct type of plastic when you're ready to mask everything off is very important. So I'm going to give you my next tip when you're selecting what you want to use to paint your car. Some things to consider. This is the first time I've used this sealer. I'm a fan of Deltron products, and I've always used Deltron sealer, Deltron base coat, Deltron clear coat. The problem was when I went to go get my color mix for the Legend, Cayman White Pearl, they were out of one of the tints or toners that goes into the Pearl or the base coat. I can't remember, but it was unavailable. It was on national back order, and so I went with a different paint line completely. And so this was my first time using the BASF RM line Diamant sealer and base coat system, and it works pretty well. And the good advantage to using this sealer and base coat system is that this sealer has a very long window of opportunity to finish your painting process, and that's very important because your sealer is what's responsible for having good adhesion to your undercoats. And if you paint a car without putting sealer on at least your repair areas, or anywhere that you've exposed bare metal and stuff like that, basically anywhere that you've primed, you're going to end up with adhesion issues later on down the road. Your paint job's not going to last very long. So the window of opportunity on this can be several days, and so that's useful if you're doing a lot of striping, a lot of graphics on the car. After the sealer coat is on there, you've got many hours to mask off areas and put graphics down. Or if you're just DIYing at home and something goes wrong during the paint process and you have to wait till the next day, you get sick and tired of dealing with it that night, you're going to wait till the next day. This sealer will allow you to do that because you have a long window of opportunity to finish up the paint process. Most sealers at your regular production body shop are not that way. They've got as little as a 4-hour, maybe less, window of opportunity, depending on temperature, to completely finish the paint process. And so that can be really stressful on somebody doing this at home or doing it for the first time. The downside to using this sealer is if you were doing this at home and you didn't have a paint booth, and you know you're going to end up with dust particles and trash in every coat of paint that you put on. This stuff stays sticky for a very long time, and so every piece of trash that gets in your sealer coat, you're not really able to sand it out unless you wait pretty much until the next day for it to become less sticky. And then it's still very difficult to sand out that trash and move on to the next step because of that stickiness. It doesn't really want to dust as you're sanding. You basically have to drag a block off of the run or the trash or whatever you've got in it and kind of clean the sandpaper off and then give it another couple of drags, because like I said, it doesn't dust. It kind of rolls up into little balls and falls away. And so the best tip I can give you, if you're trying to do it yourself at home or you're not familiar with spraying paint on automotive applications, is to do a lot of research on your sealer and base coat system. And the reason I keep saying sealer and base coat system is because I would never, ever use a sealer that was not meant for the color base that you're putting on. Always use the sealer that was meant for the color. You'll get mixed opinions on whether you should go as far as to have a clear coat that was meant for the sealer and base coat system. And my personal opinion is that does not matter very much as long as you are going with a high quality clear coat that is comparable to the quality of sealer and base coat system. So this is pretty expensive stuff. I'm holding, this paired with the bottle of hardener that it requires. Where is that at? I'm not sure I have the hardener right now in front of me, but I want to say it was like a $500 kit for what ends up being 1 gallon plus 1 quart. If you were to fully mix everything together at once, that's how much you would end up with. $500 worth of sealer right there. So like I said, it's one of the most important parts of the paint process, because if you don't use the correct sealer, or you don't use a sealer at all, you're going to end up with adhesion issues. You'll get one little rock chip on your hood and it'll turn into a mess of paint peeling away from that rock chip over time. And so that's pretty important consideration when you're coming up with your budget on your project. I used the Deltron DC4000 clear coat. That was another high dollar item. It's probably one of the best clear coats on the market. The only thing that I could think of that would maybe be better is a Glasurit clear coat, which you're talking probably $900 investment for, I think, what would be a 1.5 gallon kit once it's all fully mixed together. This is a 4-to-1 mix, so you end up with a 1.25 gallons for about $600. And I am almost through, let's see, this thing's maybe a little less than half. I've gone through one of these already, and so far on the project, I'm probably going to end up using at least 2 gallons. So yeah, I've got like $1,200 worth of clear coat on the car at this moment. Well, once I use the rest of this anyway, because I've still got to paint 2 bumpers and a couple of rocker moldings. So it should be enough to get me through that, but what else can I tell you? Selecting your materials is a big part when you're going to all the trouble to try and do a really clean job on something. You don't want to go cheap on the paint. And I will be honest with you, I have lost count of how many hours I have in this project. But to give you a general idea of how much time this took me to really do everything right, probably about 3 nights out of the work week, I will stay here for about an hour or 2 to do little things. And every single weekend, except for maybe 3 or 4 weekends over the course of the last 9 months, I was here all day Saturday, all day Sunday, plugging away at this thing. So probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 hours spent just really getting all the metal straight to where I'm not using a whole lot of body filler. I found previous repairs, removed body filler, straightened the metal out better. I highlighted one of those areas right down here on the left quarter panel. Found a prior repair. They had drilled holes to use hook pullers. I had to weld those holes up, straighten the metal, and now there's nothing but a thin coat of glaze across that area. So you can pretty much take a paint meter to any part of this car and you wouldn't see a big thick gob of body filler anywhere on it. So at the end of the day, if your goal is more like race car, you could go with some cheaper methods, cheaper materials. He's probably going to end up with, I would say, somewhere between $2,000 to $2,500 worth of paint materials when it comes time to finish this paint job up. Whereas on the restoration, I have receipts in my toolbox over here that I just added up, and I have gone well over $4,000 worth of just paint materials alone, and that is not including sandpaper, that is not including body filler, because I just used what we're using here at the shop, and so I didn't have to buy those things. So you're talking about quite a bit of expense that you're going to put in to just the paint materials alone if you're going for a high quality restoration type deal. And as I already mentioned, the labor is going to be astronomical to actually do things right. I could talk all day about what it would really cost. I'm not gonna get into that, because honestly, I am a production body shop technician. I do not do restoration. Don't even contact me about, doing a paint job on your Legend, because I'll tell you right now, your 30-year-old Legend needs more than a paint job. I'm sorry to sound like a jerk, but that's the truth of it. And I'll give you just one little example. Right here, there was a little bit of rust starting on this car. Now let me just tell you, this is probably one of the most rust-free bodies I've ever seen. If you would have started disassembling this car, you take the rear bumper off. It's the easiest thing to do to see how much rust is really going on this area right here. You actually have bolts on this coupe, actually studs on the bumper that go through these holes, and little nuts that hold it on from the back side. And this area here is notorious for where these things start rusting away, and then you start seeing it creep up to the rest of the quarter panel. This car had absolutely nothing going on down here. It was all perfectly solid. I had to do no repairs whatsoever on this area, but just sand it out, reseal it, and put paint on it. And even though this is such a perfect example of a rust-free car, I still wouldn't call it rust-free, because like I said, when I took this glass out, there was a little bit of rust starting to start coming up around this edge, and it was starting to creep underneath the urethane, the adhesive that actually holds the glass in. And so if you don't plan ahead for these sort of things, and you just start spending a bunch of money on paint materials, and you never take the glass out, you're doing a lot of work without really fixing the underlying issue going on. And something I've seen on literally every single Legend that I've put hands on is the factory seam sealer in this trough here will start to separate. It's starting to dry rot, and you take this molding off, most likely you're going to see a crack running right down through here, and that's something that really needs to be addressed. This molding will not seal out water. You will constantly have water going down into this trough, and if that crack is there, rest assured you are getting water in between the panels. And what I mean by in between the panels is you can see the little welds going down through here. The roof skin and the quarter panel are two separate pieces of metal, and it's welded along this pinch weld with little spot welds. And so once that crack is there, water is getting in between those panels, and it's only a matter of time before it's going to start to rust out at the seams. And that is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to have to deal with, considering you can't get a new roof skin. So a lot of things you're going to run into on your body during the planning process. You need to go ahead and start taking things apart, seeing how much corrosion is really going on, so that you can really budget for what needs to be done. If you start running into a lot of corrosion issues, again, you can't just buy new sheet metal for these cars. You're down to finding a donor car to cut metal off of if you have smaller areas to do. If you got major rust issues, just stop. Find a body that has less rust on it. You can't buy replacement panels. If you're gonna have to hack up a rust-free body to try to get your rusty, it doesn't make sense to me to do that. I understand if there's some sentimental value to the car or something like that, but from my standpoint, how much work you're gonna have to put into, there is no perfect way to cut a roof skin or a quarter panel off of a rust-free body and put it back onto your car that's rusted out exactly the way it was done at the factory. And it's just a mess. You don't want to have to do that. So before you start buying stuff, before you start putting a lot of work into your body, really give it a good look over. Take your bumpers off, take the rocker moldings off, and really give it a good look over to see what kind of corrosion issues. So the last thing I'm going to cover is just one example of trying to plan ahead for what you want to do with your car, so that you can further determine how much work and how much cost is going to go in. One of my biggest pet peeves on this car are these back glass moldings. Even if you have moldings on your car that look perfect, and you think you're going to be able to just snap them off and snap them back on, they are extremely difficult to get off of the car and to reinstall without putting slight little bends in them, because they are a metal strip built into the back glass molding. And once they're bent out of shape, they're really hard to get back into perfect shape again. And it's always been just a real big pain in the butt for me. So you can see I've gone with the rubber universal moldings on the car. And I did what I called the upside down method, because this molding is literally flipped upside down right here from what it's supposed to be. Down here at the bottom, this is more like how this molding was meant to go on. Let's see if I can get this peeled up. Like that, to where it's kind of curving downward like a lip. So that's a wider molding than this is. This one was a 19 millimeter. That's a I want to say 31 millimeter or something like that. It was the absolute widest one I could get, and I do wish I could find one that was wider to where it completely came down to kind of this edge right here, so you didn't see these little alcoves. Now what those are is, on your OEM molding there are clips that go into a hole right there, and this is one of those things that I planned ahead. Before I did any paint work on the car, I welded every single one of those holes up all the way along there, because I knew I was not going to go with OEM moldings. I was not going to be using those clips, and so the holes could just be sealed up. So that's one of the things I did to plan ahead, and also because I'm putting this section of the molding on upside down to where there's nothing out on the outer surface here. That lip kind of sits up against that inner edge, and you'll notice when you take your moldings off, all the little plastic clips that are kind of snapped onto these little metal studs that are part of the body. Those little metal studs would be pushing up against my lip right now, and you'd see little lumps down through there. So that's something else I had to plan ahead before I did paint, was to grind off every one of those metal studs completely flush. Doing the same thing with the windshield. There used to be little metal studs right there. We ground every single one of them flush before we painted. And it's a really good idea, because of the rust issue I was pointing out right here. Go ahead and fully remove all of the adhesive, the original urethane adhesive that held the OEM glass in. Took it all down to bare metal. We put epoxy on that bare metal, and then we started our paint process after that. And it's those little rust spots that can turn into a big problem later on if they're not addressed during your paint process the first time around. So I'm just going to make a note as to why I went with the upside down method on this car with the rubber moldings, because you will notice the back glass is kind of this way too. It's like 3/4 of an inch right here, but as you go down, this thing gets like 1.25 inches. This distance here gets wider as you go down. So if I put the molding on right side up, and say I use the 19 millimeter to where it just barely lipped over the edge right here, as we get on down to the bottom of the glass, it would fall off of that edge and then just sit on the inside, and it would kind of look weird. With the upside down method, that lip will kind of be sitting up like this against that inner edge. None of it will overlap onto the surface, and it'll just, it won't be as noticeable, it won't be as ugly, and it'll look kind of closer to OEM appearance, and kind of a modernized appearance if you ask me. And when I get all that back in, of course, y'all get to see it. But I just kind of really like the way that everything ends up being almost perfectly flat this way. I don't have rubber overlapping this edge. And again, I'm always looking to the future. If I get a scratch on the roof, a scratch on the quarter, I won't have to take my glass back out. I won't have to remove moldings to get a good clean paint job. I can get me a little bit of tape to hold the lip of the rubber back against the edge of the glass like that, and I'll be able to scuff out this edge and get my clear coat when I repaint into that crack. Then when I release the tape, there'll be no tape line whatsoever in the case that I have to do any future repairs. So it's just little stuff like that that I'm looking ahead. I want to future proof. I want the car to stay clean for another 30 years. So I went with high quality materials and thought about all these things that I'm pointing out to you. I just can't stress enough on how much you really need to think ahead and not just start sanding stuff down and slapping some paint on something, especially when you're dealing with cars this old. If you really care about the project, you want everything to come out clean, I hope you take these tips and do something with it. I really do. So I've been asked a lot of questions lately about how I did this, how I did that, and I keep responding with, hey, I'm making a DIY video for that, or I'm working on the videos. And it's not me procrastinating. I have to get this project done because I'm actually leaving this shop here soon at the end of this month, and I have to keep my nose to the grinding stone and get the project done, complete, get it out of here, and then once I'm settled into the new place, I'll have time to finish those videos. So I've been asked a lot about these drip moldings, how I got those reattached when you can't get clips for them. I did come up with a method to reattach that molding that hopefully will reduce the wind noise, because you'll notice there are these tiny little rubber lips that are on the edge of that molding that always just dry rot and they fall apart. A lot of people just yank them out, and you'll notice after you yank those little rubber strips off, you end up with a little bit of wind noise coming from around the top of that door. And so I came up with a method that kind of seals up that area along with reattaching that molding. And I'm making a specific video for that. And everything you need to know about how I did these back glass moldings, that's all going to be detailed in a separate video as well. I actually have a couple of videos that are done, ready to be posted, if not for the fact that I make a lot of reference to other videos that are not completed yet. And just an example of that is making the rubber for the belt molding here. Y'all know, y'all saw that one. I did a really clean job of making new rubber for these and the coupe window, and they're fully functional. I got everything figured out. But like in that video, I don't want to include everything, like fully disassembling the door and how to get the belt molding off. It just makes for a really long, boring video. And so I'm making a separate video that fully covers disassembling everything on the door and getting all those little trim pieces off without breaking stuff, and how to kind of correct some things if you do end up breaking. So once all the videos are done, they'll all be released at the same time, and y'all have a lot of information, a lot of stuff to work with, so you can plan on what you need to do to your car. I'm now 100% satisfied with how those came out. You can see everything looks nice and flush. Window goes up and down without grabbing the rubber. And it is tricky, it's very complicated. And so I'm kind of putting a lot of effort into making the video as condensed as possible and as professional as possible, to where you're not just sitting there watching me do stuff. I'm actually voice-overing and all that good stuff to kind of give it a more professional quality video. So thanks for all the interest, and as always, keep the legend alive.